So, challenges of Dragon Age production during the pandemic. Scylla Costa, chief producer of BioWare, will discuss the adaptations and necessary skills in learning from remote working in the development of new Dragon Age during the pandemic, and he ponders on the future of teamwork. This panel will be originally in Portuguese, so if you want to watch it in English, you know how to do it. Use the web link on our channel here. So I am here to welcome with great love Scylla Costa, chief producer at BioWare. How you doing, Scylla? How you doing, Barbara? I'm great. I am fantastic. I was so happy to see that we have a Brazilian representing us out there. It's cool to see that, especially in such an important production, a loved franchise. Well, thank you. You know, we have many fans in Brazil, both of the Dragon Age and Mass Effect and Anthem that BioWare just created. Oh, they're killers. So you've got the screen now, Scylla. Thank you so much, Barbara. Let's begin our presentation. Let me share my screen with you, folks. I hope it's all good there. So here we go. How you doing, folks? I'm Scylla Costa, Brazilian, as you've noticed. I was born in Rio. However, I moved to Recife in the northeast of Brazil when I was 6 years old. So I went to the northeast, and Recife is my hometown. It's my home. My parents, my family, my wife's family live there. And so I grew up there in Recife. I went to college there. So let me give you a bit of background for you to understand a bit of stuff we're going to talk further down the road. So I was born in Recife. I grew up, went to college, computer science at the Federal University, and I met some friends there and ended up creating a company. It was called Jinx Playware. Myself and two other friends from computing and two from business admin. So our studio was founded in 2000. We got some funding, created the first game called Futsing, and took 3.5 years actually for us to get Futsing. And we started with a small game, MMO, soccer simulator, massive multiplayer. It's a crazy for the times, you know, when you're beginning, but sometimes you don't know what you don't know, right? So we started with Futsim. After 3.5 years of developing, we launched it, operating Futsim for another year and a half. And Futsim was not having the level of success we desired. It was making money, but it was going to be almost like flat, you know, just almost breaking even. It was not growing so much. And then we decided to change the plans in the company, and we started going to serious games and advert games for advertising industry and training industry. Over 50 games that we created in 2 to 3 years using lots of online technology. It was great learning for me as a developer, and we had a nice company. We came to have 35 developers at some point, even doing mobile games with Samsung and Sony Ericsson at the time. And then in 2008, early 06, I left the heat of Recife to the cold of Helsinki in Finland, way there in Finland in the north. So in the south of Finland, in the north of Europe, right? And as you can see here, so I moved to Finland, and darn cold, you know, coming out of the 30-something Celsius in Recife. It was 23 Celsius positive, and in Finland, I got minus 18. So I thought it was the greatest cold I had ever had. I would never go through something worse than that. But in Finland, I went to work. I worked a company called Somea, a studio comprised of now the creators of Supercell, Nico Borisov, Jukka Paneman, and others. They had a gaming studio development for mobile, and I was hired as a producer, moved there, and so many other Brazilians moved there as well. Most coming from the company that I founded, Jinx Playware, myself and my friends. So I worked at Somea. Somea was part of Digital Chocolate, created Trade Hawkins by the same one who created EA. And so they had studios in several places, in Barcelona, Helsinki. The headquarters of Digital Chocolate was in California. In Bangalore, in India, there was a studio as well. So it was great learning for me as well. In Finland, we started working with mobile games. Had over 25 games in 2 years, and value cheats was a great learning that I had in Finland. So when we came to 08, I got a proposition to come to Canada to work at BioWare. So I crossed the ocean again, and fearless, just wanted to be happy. Came to, I was ready for the cold. It's really cold here in winter. So Finland was just not a warm up, but a cool up, let's say. And it's a cool city, especially if you have kids and family. Schools and quality of life. It's fantastic. So I came to work at BioWare here and started working in the first game, Mass Effect 2. Then we worked for PCs, Xbox 360, and just Xbox 360 and PC. And then we launched the PS3 version. After that, I worked for Mass Effect 3 as well. And then after the launch of Mass Effect 3, I became the producer. All of my MMO foot sim experience helped a lot. Then I went to Dragon Age Inquisition over 3 years. Dragon Age Inquisition, fantastic project, fantastic game. Mass Effect Andromeda, 9 months, a short period. And then Anthem, where I worked as a producer. Today, I'm working with Dragon Age as lead producer. So myself and another lead producer were the leads, the heads of the whole project. Obviously, there's my boss, the executive producer, Christian Daly. So that's my background. Again, I worked both with PC, foot sim, mobile, with mobile games, and a bit of PC and console over there. And finally, working with AAA games, PC, PlayStation, and Xbox. So here we go. What's the agenda for today? We're going to talk a bit about the introduction, short introduction about a AAA development cycle, AAA game development cycle. I'm not sure about the audience. It's difficult to get an online presentation. You don't see anyone, so you don't know their age, whoever's watching, their background and everything. Okay, so it's going to be a brief introduction for a AAA game development cycle. Then we're going to skip and talk a bit about what happened when we were developing Dragon Age and the pandemic hit. The short, medium, and long-term changes we had to go through, and a bit looking into the future, the necessary skills for a developer after. I don't know if the pandemic, if we're going to go back to normal or not. I don't know, but the necessary skills for developers from now on. So here we go. First, let's look at the AAA game development cycle. What are AAA games? Games that are launched usually in several platforms at the same time, simultaneously, for consoles like Xbox and PlayStation, and the PC platform as well. Usually, this is a AAA game development cycle. So there's a pre-production stage. So depending on the size of your game, in the case of BioWare, it can vary in the beginning from 5 up to 30 people, depending on the size, up to almost 60 people when we're just about to go through the gate and go to production. I apologize as well if sometimes I forget the words in Portuguese. I've been living away from Brazil since 06, so it's like 15 years. So yeah, sometimes I get a bit confused and I may say something in English and I won't even know this, but here we go. Pre-production. So in the pre-production phase, we go through the game concept, the prototypes based on the main concept of the game, and start developing systems. In the case of BioWare, all BioWare games, they're strong in narrative, so we have lots of tools related to game narrative so that the editors, the writers, the scene designers that work on the dialogues when you see the characters holding a dialogue, all of that side of the team, they need systems in order to support the development of narratives. So during the pre-production stage, that's what we do. we seek the game's concept, the focus of the game, the key features that the game will have, and obviously lots of market research. You have to bear in mind that in the case of a AAA game, when I worked in mobile in 2006, a bit before the iPhone, we could get a game done in 3 months. We developed from beginning to end, and it was out being marketed in 4 months. The game was being marketed. In a AAA game, in the case of BioWare, this can take the pre-production stage 4, 5, 6 years up until the launch of the game. So it really depends on the size of the team during development. So when we were just coming close to this close time of production, that's when the pandemic hit. So the next slides, we're going to get to this point. I'm going to say everything that happened, but just for you to get some background, during the production period, that's where we are now. It's the stage where you go through the whole development of content and features. So you have the systems, or most systems already exist. Maybe you're developing a few new systems due to certain features that you might need in the game, but you're now escalating. The team starts growing, and 2 to 3 fold to the original size of pre-production stage. So this is the time where we are now in the production phase. After the production stage, you go to alpha stage, where features have to be fully implemented. And when we reach the alpha stage, systems should all be running and working. All the game features should be already in the game, and you can test. Yeah, of course, we start testing from pre-production, but in alpha, you run the technical tests, heavier tests, with lots of players trying to play at the same time. And so when you get to the beta phase, you should have your full content, and now you're going to balance it. And so there are many more tests with players, and lots of different types of tests that you run in order to know if the game is well balanced, and final tweaks before launch. And finally, you have the launch phase stage, where you're going to create what we call the war room, a place where when you launch, during those weeks prior to launching, you have everybody from the development team, the marketing team, technology team, and all of the different business units, the areas, the publishing team, all the different areas of game development and game release. They get together at least once a day in this war room, so-called war room, where all of the issues are brought to the table. Everything's reported to this room, and they're prioritized based on the prioritization, and you decide the following steps, the next issues. After the launch, obviously, patches, that's a industry practice. You day 0 patch, usually, and other patches after the launch. And finally, the last stage is new content stage, where you run the DLCs, downloaded contents, and you have a game with more content. So this is a crash course of the development cycle for a AAA game.
Should you have any questions, just send them to us using the chat box, and then we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So this is the 12th of March, 2020. We had our team gathered. We had a new office downtown, 3-story building. We had spent over 10 years in a certain location, and we had just moved. The team was growing, and we noticed we need a larger office. And then in August 2019, we found this studio in the city center with 3 stories for us. And that was just fantastic, really. And on the 12th of March, 2020, we had gathered. We were reviewing the story for the new Dragon Age game. Everyone was very excited. And on the evening of that day, we got an email from the CEO saying that due to the pandemic, and the pandemic hit California strong at the beginning. So we got this email with the instructions that we should all start working remotely. We knew that this was a possibility, so we were already planning on how we're going to have all of the developers working from home. But we had less than 50% of the developers able to work from home. You need at least a VPN so that you can log in and do your job just normally. But then that's what happened on the 12th of March. And on the 13th of March, I showed up at the office and it was deserted. There was literally basically no one there. It was just me and the IT infrastructure guys and one or two odd developers. And I was part of the team that was working on allowing people to work at home. So we had already 50% at the start, 50% of developers ready to work at home. And well, the studio was really empty, deserted. It's odd, right? It's such a beautiful studio. And then you look at it and see it empty. It's just strange. So we started working to make all of these short-term changes that were needed. So let's talk about these first, short-term changes. When the pandemic first hit, our top priority was to look after our developers. Many of our developers are parents, so they have children. They also have relatives who live in the same household. So we were looking at each one of them on a case-by-case basis to understand who they were, because we know that schools and daycares were also shut down. So children had to study from home as well. So overnight, you have to start working at home and your children have to study from home. And you are very unlikely, or possibly you don't have all of the infrastructure at hand to be able to deal with that. So we spoke to each one of our developers and asked them what we could do to support them. And the first thing we were able to do was to be very flexible around working hours and deadlines. Electronic Arts was really good. They really supported developers, especially in these first months of the pandemic. They are still supporting them very much, but in these first months of the pandemic, the support they gave developers was just fantastic. And you can see that I'm in my office, right? This is the basement of my home. I'm really lucky from that perspective because I already had my office organized. I already had a proper desk. I even have a hammock in the background, do you see? So as I read a paper, I can just lie in the hammock and read. So that's not the best background I can have for a meeting, but it looks good. So I was lucky from that perspective, really. I had my office space, I had that already ready at home. But most developers didn't. They were working from the kitchen table, or they're working from the living room using a laptop computer. Or they would go to the backyard. You know, each developer was trying to sort it out their own way. Because that's how it happened, right? It was just overnight, and everyone was told they had to work from home. So no one was really ready to deal with that change. So the first step was to enable our developers to work remotely. As a producer, my main task is to communicate with the team. So I have daily meetings, a number of daily meetings, and I don't depend so much on powerful hardware. As you can see in this picture, this is the audio team. They need amplifiers, they need speakers. And when you think of the lighting team, they need tablets, they need large screens. So there was a lot of work that we had to go through to really understand the needs of each one of them to see what needed to be done. So as you can see here, you have a screen and you have a tablet. So we needed to really understand the individual needs of all developers and understand what the steps were that we needed to take so that everyone could operate from home. So if they could use a VPN, if they could download the build, if they were able to have the right performance, if they could, submit their change lists. I think people call changeless in Portuguese too, I reckon. So your codes, you know that you have to submit to the server, and then look at the build again and test the game again. Some people needed to dial up their internet access, right? So we had some developers who lived on a farm on the country, and they had a 10 megabit per second internet connection to download a build. Well, it would just take them 6 to 8 hours. So they needed to hire a more powerful internet connection. And some people even use Starlink from Elon Musk's company. So some people needed a lot of cable because they were working far away from the router. And you would need sometimes a 50-meter long cable, and then you would just have that cable line around the house. And of course, as time went by, things got better and better. But at the beginning, we just wanted to enable everyone to work. The chair you're going to be sitting in is also very important, because some people work from their living room chair or from the kitchen chair. And if you sit there for 1 or 2 hours, it's not a problem. But if you sit there for 8 hours, that will lead to backaches, for example, to health issues, also blood circulation problems in your legs. And every 3 months, there was a sum that was given so that we could help people buy a new mouse or a new keyboard or a new monitor, anything that would be needed for your office setting at home to be improved. Also, microphones and cameras. You couldn't find webcams, right? It was very hard to buy a webcam. I hope my microphone is working well, but that was one of the things that I bought at the start of the pandemic. What about mid and long-term changes? What were they? When it comes to Dragon Age, of course. We have to look at this from 2 perspectives. There is the change in the personal and in the professional environments. I really like data. I'm that guy. So if you know me, you know that. And this is a screenshot of my Fitbit, the one that counts the steps every day. So if you look at this chart, you'll see that when the pandemic started, so when we started working from home, you can see that the number of steps I took a day really plunged. You can see it was almost half of what I was having for the coming or the following 4 months. And it's no rocket science, right, that you should understand that this is going to have an impact on your life quality. So I was not the only one, of course. I'm just showing you this specific example. You change your routine, because even when you're at work, the fact that you're going from one meeting room to another, or from one story to another, then you're moving, you're walking, going up and down the stairs. And that will really support your sport, so to speak, right? So your physical activities. And then when you cut that by half, then you start having backache, you have you start experiencing pain in your legs. And when you have a number of meetings back to back without any break, your brain gets tired. There are a number of studies about that, and you can find them on the internet. So that was the first bit of data I started looking at. I was starting to feel a bit listless. I wasn't really feeling too good. And then I started looking at my Fitbit data, and I started to understand, oh, I'm not exercising, of course, that's it. So I needed to change my routine. I needed to get up at the same time. I need to get dressed as I would when I was going to go to work. I needed to have lunch at the right time, not have a meeting during lunchtime, and not work into the night, right? You needed to have a time to really call it a day, to clock out. And I noticed that it wasn't only me, all other developers were going through a similar experience. And those that adapted faster became more productive a lot faster too. This is also Fitbit data to the right. This is my heart rate, so beats per minute. You can see how this worsened. So I was at rest, but I had a higher number of beats per minute because I had less physical activities, and you don't have to be a science or a physician to understand that there is a direct correlation between these pieces of data. You may be wondering what this other piece of data here, but I had a kidney stone in February, so there was this little peak here. So what did I do? And many other developers did that too. So I bought a stand-up desk. I can raise the level or reduce the level of the desk so I can stand while I work using my laptop. And some meetings where I was going to, for example, deliver a talk, then I would possibly be standing or really walking on the treadmill so that I could, at least count in a few steps for my Fitbit data. So that's one thing that I found to improve my physical and mental well-being. Other developers have done some similar activities. They started practicing yoga, they started going for a jog or for a walk. So everyone needed to make a change to their everyday routine in comparison to what they had prior to the pandemic. And the pandemic has been around for over a year now. And every other week, there are different restrictions in place. So really every 2 weeks, there's a different thing that you can or can't do. And I started also moving around the property. So I started, for example, working on the deck. I started renovating it. I was never a DIY man, like a do-it-yourself man, but I, bought some tools and I started, trying my luck. Some people started new hobbies, and that's what happened to me too. So I fixed the steps. I painted the fence, painted the deck. A lot of things that we fixed around the house, we renovated this and that. So this is another way to be moving, to be active, and also being somewhere else, because you're not just like waking up, staying in office, going to have a meal, and staying in the office again. You need to go to other locations, right? Even if it's within your own house. And I love barbecues, right? I love to grill. So that doesn't change, and that didn't change the pandemic either. Going back to the data, you can see that there are changes here. I changed my routine. I changed how often I worked out. So this improved. The number of steps improved. And look at that. My beats per minute also improved. This is at rest. You can see it went down. So the fewer beats per minute you have at rest, the better. So it took some adapting. I suffered during these 4 months here, and then I started implementing changes, and then I started improving my own lifestyle. And many of our developers had a very similar process. I'm using my data here because I don't have the people's data at hand to show. So that's why.
From the professional point of view, so that was the personal side. Now, on the short term, now let's talk about the professional point of view. Obviously, we had to improve the remote delivery of builds. So I'm working from home. I need a VPN. Every single day I have to download builds and make my changes in the game and uploading it into the server again. So we had to work with infrastructure, had to research other technologies that we could use as Parsec. It's a streaming technology that enabled developers, for example, if the Xbox or PlayStation development kit is in the BioWare office, remotely you can access the console and develop and test its development. So it makes it much easier. Another thing we had to work on was adapting channels of communication, comms channels. So this is a scene from our team working on what we call the storyboards, where we put, the narrative, when you have a story, before you implement the whole motion capture, performance capture, you run the storyboards, these small illustrations and drawings that reflect the drafts that show quickly what the intent of the scene or scenes that we're building are. And so in that case, before the pandemic, we went to the meeting room, sat down, talked, and you would interact, and it was really cool. But after the pandemic, how do you do that over Zoom? You can, but you only see the little, person's head. You don't see all the expressions. Everybody's kind of little there with their avatars. Some people are embarrassed about speaking over Zoom, so you have to adapt the comms system. You have to unlearn the way you developed before, so that you can relearn and adapt yourself to new ways of communicating. In our case, we had to analyze Slack, for example, was the tool that we adopted, a communication tool where you can create the channels and you can create private chats. You can have individual chats as well, and even calls. In our case, it's integrated with Zoom. The calls are integrated, but the comms channels can be very confusing on Slack. So you have to create a kind of a structure where you define how quickly the person should reply. You send them. If I send you a message, that means it's just like I come close to you and touch your shoulder and I say, Scylla, I need your help. Or is it like an email that I can reply in like 24 hours? So you have to define the process for your communication channels so that it's clear for the team as a whole how that's going to flow, especially when you have a team with over 30 people, more than the tens, hundreds of people sometimes. So you have to have communication channels very well structured. In the old days, before the pandemic, we had the stand-up meeting where developers would come around in a circle, and every morning they would talk about their activities, the activities that they were going to work on, if they had any roadblocks, and how do you replace the stand-up meetings. There was another way, also using Slack, where people at a certain time of the day that they would send the messages and update the statuses. If they're green, yellow, or red being blocked, yellow you need help, and green it's all cool, and a bit of detail of what they're working on. Another issue that we had to face, we didn't even know we would have, it's a number of meetings after everybody started working from home. The number of meetings just went through the roof. With a Dragon Age project, it was a humongous number of meetings, because people, again, in terms of communication channels, they didn't have a good structure to work from a remote with a communication channel. So any conversation became a meeting. So everybody started scheduling meetings right and left. And at the end of the day, you had very little time to actually develop and work on your to-do list. And so we had to work with a team seriously to reduce the number of, to really analyze deep down, be very pragmatic in terms of meetings, recurring meetings. Which meetings should actually be recurring, if all meetings were really necessary, or they could be, we could have it over a communication channel such as Slack. So we had to give that guideline to the team to help. And when we started working, it really improved significantly. And, the number of meetings decreased, and the effectiveness, being sure that we had a agenda prior to scheduling, the person who's leading the meeting, and especially sending the notes after the meeting, because sometimes a person would go to the meeting because they wanted to know what was being discussed, but they didn't have to be there in that meeting. So if you could have the meeting notes from what was discussed, the person could simply read through the notes, the summary, and wouldn't have to actually spend 30 minutes or an hour attending the meeting. Something else we did was extremely important. Meetings on Outlook, by default, it's 30 minutes. 30 minutes, 1 hour. Those are 30-minute bricks. We decreased it to 25 or 55 to give them a 5-minute break, a bio break. Come on, they got to go to the restroom, get a glass of water or something, just like me. Having a break, you're in front of the computer like 4 hours in a row, one meeting after the other. It's extremely tiring, mentally, physically. So it's important to stand up and kind of walk around, grab some water, some coffee, some tea, and come back to work. That was another change that we did. From the content point of view, the most difficult was this one here, was adapting what we call the PCAP and MOCAP. PCAP, it's the acronym for performance capture, or the capture of performance, and MOCAP is motion capture. So we hire actors, and as you can see in this illustration, it's a large studio. They wear all of these sensors on their body, several cameras that are spread through the environment, that they capture the sensors. And from there, we can capture all of the animations from the movement. In the case of performance capture, you capture also their voice and facial expressions as well from the actors. But with the pandemic, there were great limitations to what we could and couldn't do. So maybe looking through this angle, it feels that they're relatively close, maybe 1 meter apart. But in real life, when you look through a different angle, you see that they're like 5 meters. They're all wearing masks. And there's no other person around in the studio. As you can see, it's actually the directors, the heads are here. There's a big screen here, the director. So before the pandemic, they said we couldn't do PCAP and MOCAP remotely, all the directors remotely. Usually the director would be there next to the actors because, they could stand right next there and giving the guidance on the, the performance and the text also. But with a pandemic, no, everything changes. And you see it's a empty studio, basically. Lots of rules and everything remote. Again, the word is adapting. We had to adapt ourselves, had to change processes, and it's all up and running. It's a bit harder work. It's different, but it's possible to be done. So people start rethinking what is possible and what is not possible to be done. Well, what was said to be impossible before, now it is fully possible. What about the future? What's going to happen with the future? Well, there's a study, the future of work after COVID-19. There's a typo there. I think I put the name twice there. McKinsey Global Institute. It's a PDF, open, free. Download it. I recommend it. It's a cool study. It talks about the future of work after COVID-19. So the areas I wanted to highlight here, because all of them are related to what I was talking about. The first one, obviously, we went from 0% or almost zero, a very small percentage of our team working from home, to 100% maybe working from home, not because it was a choice, but because it was mandatory. There was no other option. You had to work from home. So around the world, we see, obviously, there was this quick spike, this change, work from home, remote work. And the trend is for us not to go back to zero again. The trend is that we're going to be kind of halfway through. There's going to be some time that you're going to be working from home. We don't, we're going to have more flexibility for workers and developers. Maybe you might work 3 out of 5 days from home, but it really depends on what you do. Like I said, in the case of our audio developers, audio engineers, they require lots of equipment. So the same quantity and quality of equipment, having it at home or at the office, so depending on your role, you might be working more often or less often from home. Next piece of data, I thought it was interesting. This one here, related to, oh, there's some great questions. We're going to come to the questions soon. So about cost of rent, especially in the US, the increase of rent in certain areas of the US. So if you look at the red, that means it's 30% decrease of the cost in rent. So if you look at major cities like Seattle, San Francisco, LA, Chicago, Boston, New York, Miami, Houston, Dallas, all of them, the major centers they have a decline in the cost of rent. Why? Because during the pandemic, people started doing what I did, which is started taking care of their own homes, start spending 24 hours, not just 8 hours or 10 hours a day at home. So you start having to reassess what you need from your home, and in some situations, some of our developers tried, the couple said, okay, both worked from home, and sometimes there was one office for one person, not for the second person, so they had to move because they need their own workspace. So lots of people started moving. It's not by chance, I'm moving. If you look at the boxes down there, I'm literally moving today. At the end of the day today, I'm moving to my new home. I'm going to start taking the boxes. So people started reassessing what was important in life. Some people are moving further away because they want to pay cheaper rents, or because they want more contact with nature or quality of life. Other people want more room. Some people want less room, but different needs. But I thought it was interesting because I went through this without knowing about these studies or anything. And many of my developers in my team also went through that. And I know over 10 developers who recently moved from their houses, and so from their homes. So as part of the pandemic, we have to start understanding that with these changes, people are going to have to adapt themselves, and they're going to have to change certain skills that you use on a daily basis. So, for example, one of my quote unquote superpowers is my skills of communication with my team. It was great when we were in the office. I saw when somebody was stressed, when somebody was upset or sad or something. I could come to them and say, talk to them. And today, remotely, it's much more difficult for me. So I can't see these issues, except if I contact them proactively. I had to change my routine to continue playing my role of lead producer. So another bit, we're going to have increased competition now that companies are more open to working remotely. You increase competition for developers, and so we saw both sides of the coin at BioWare. We were able to hire developers from many places that before we couldn't hire. So from Montreal, from Vancouver, some from the US, and some, in the past, our purpose was always our idea. Also, you move to Edmonton or Austin, where BioWare has the studios. So you had to relocate to these cities. And now that's not the case anymore. And this is opening opportunities for us to hire highly talented people that we could not have access to before. And so
let's get started with the questions. Barbara, will you lend me a hand here? Absolutely. Thank you very much, Scylla, for all this content. And let's have the first question. So Dragon Age 4 went into production. Is pre-production over? We're already in the production phase for Dragon Age. We're not giving out a lot of details yet, but we have concluded the pre-production phase. And I'm really excited because I'm a big fan of Dragon Age and the whole series. And I think we really have the opportunity to launch the best story out of the 4 Dragon Ages that have been launched, the 4 Dragon Age games. The characters are amazing, and I'm dying to say more, but I can't.
Muito bom. Bom, qual é a
All right.
importância de manter um jogo como esse
And how important is it to keep the production of a game like this going on during a pandemic and working from home? When you work from home, you need to keep your team as productive as possible. We noticed that some people became more productive and other people became less productive when they started working from home. And we were analyzing it on a case by case basis because it may be not that transparent for you to understand why they became more or less productive. So, looking at those that were less productive, we were interested in seeing what we could do to help. But at the beginning of the pandemic, we were first of all looking at the developer as a person and what that person needed. And if for a certain period of time, that person was going to be less productive because that person is going to have to look after their children who are now studying from home, all right, fine. But if there's something that we can do about it, for example, improving their internet connection, then we can do it. If we can purchase a new device, better equipment, then we can do that too. Production needed to continue. We wanted to be able to launch the game. So that was a really interesting challenge that was definitely not in anyone's plans, but we needed to adapt. And let me show you the next slide here. And what's interesting is that we'll need to adapt in the future too. People need to understand that what are the new skills that they'll need in their position. So this is one of our writers. Maybe he can work from home for a number of days a week, but maybe some other positions can't be remote. So we'll need to look at what people need in order to be successful. So for example, as a developer, because not everyone is going to be in the same space, in the same office all the time. Absolutely. After all these discussions that we have had in this past years with crunching, so it's important that we have a more humane type of development. Next question, did productivity go down with remote work and were deadlines adjusted? Well, the productivity did go down in the first month, but as I said, we're looking at each individual case, each developer, so that we could make sure that we could get them back to the best level of productivity possible during that time. Again, that was not possible for everyone because of their personal context, but some people became even more productive because, for example, you had a person coding at home who was not getting interrupted because they were alone at home. So that increased their productivity, or a level designer, an artist, didn't get interrupted and was able to produce more. So it does affect productivity in general, but I think this is part of our new reality. So we have adapted and adjusted some deadlines, and we have enough data now to understand how long we'll need to launch the game. We've always used historical data. We already did so before the pandemic, and now we're doing that even more during the pandemic to make sure that we are doing things at the right time. All right. Do you think the pandemic enabled developers in Brazil to work for companies abroad developing AAA games? I believe so, Barbara. We already have some Brazilians working at BioWare. There are some that are in Montreal, some in Austin. And I think this has even opened the doors wider because if you have the talent, your geography is not going to hold you back. It's not something like you're going to have to move to a new country to take a new position. Some companies may choose not to hire people from another country because the labor issues, the legal aspects may be too cumbersome for them to do so. So they would only do that if there's a substantial talent that they want to reach out to. And there are also things like the time zones. For example, if someone is in another country where there is a 12-hour time difference, then that could be a bit of a hurdle. But even in such cases, there are activities that, for example, uh, can be carried out while the rest of the team is asleep. So you can be testing the game. We may be working on a specific aspect of the build. And then when everyone wakes up, that's ready. And whoever adapts will be able to find new job opportunities. And just to set the stage so that everyone understands at home, so when we talk about AAA games, so AAA games, these are games that are um, games with a lot of investment, differently from indie independent games. So when it comes to mental health, what can you say about that? This is something that changed, or at least people were affected. There are more aspects, right? There's the physical aspect, there's the mental aspect, and the social aspect. So there are three aspects where people were impacted. When it comes to mental well-being, EA supported us. You always have companies that you can give a ring and then you can speak to a therapist, for example. And then depending on what the problem is, you have different companies that you can contact or different people that you can contact. So EA had always been good at supporting us, but that improved even further during the pandemic. So they offered services that you could take advantage of. You could also take a couple of days off because of the pandemic. So my son is working, or rather studying from home, and then I had to look after my two children today. So maybe taking a day off would be very helpful. So there were several types of ways to support people. But as a producer, I had to be very mindful of all of that. Also, because you're not able to see people all the time. So I may not see someone for 5 days. So I needed to be in contact with them in different ways to make sure that they were doing well, or if there's anything that I could do to help. But this is something that really went up, how much we were monitoring people's well-being. And as leaders, we have to be careful. We have to look after our teams, right? And this is our last question now. This is a very interesting question. Should I answer that in Portuguese or English? You should speak English. We have simultaneous translation. So I'm going to repeat the question in Portuguese. So the story in Dragon Age, did it change because of the pandemic? So if we were talking about a virus or a plague or pest, if there was anything that changed. Dragon Age, Mass Effect, these are games where we try to have a narrative that is relatable. That means something that you really relate to, you identify with, so that you understand what that character is going through. So there will always be points that are relatable to people in their everyday lives. So when it comes to the pandemic, we had nothing that was directly, specifically connected to the pandemic, but the Dragon Age story has the blinds. Well, it has the blights. It's not exactly a virus, but there is an aspect of fantasy. There are, so as I said, the blights and dark spawns, and well, these are things that we didn't create specifically because of the pandemic. Of course, these are things that we had been doing 10 years ago already. But sometimes you need to adapt a story. That was not the case with Dragon Age, but it has happened to other games. We had to make a change to the storyline because of something that took place in the real world, and there was a strong correlation that we decided to change then because of that. Thank you very much for everyone who was here, and thank you for sending your questions. Thank you, Scylla. And your final remarks to button it up. So the message I wanted to to send is that you should look and find opportunities. So I spoke of that study by McKinsey. There's a lot of opportunities in the market right now. So if you have your own company, or if you work for a company that renders service to other companies, you probably have a lot of opportunity right now. When you think of EA, Activision, all of these companies, they are changing the way they work, and they're changing the way they organize their projects. So all of these changes, well, a crisis will always spark opportunities. So I look at a crisis and I try to see how we can grow. So I think this is an opportunity not only for developers in Brazil and in South America, but for everyone to find new areas, departments they can work for, and to partner up with other companies. Thank you very much, Scylla, for your participation.
Big Festival 2021, the biggest games festival in Latin America.